Erotic crystallization inertia. That which is pleasing to the eye gives joy, and joy gives strength, and strength gives life. We receive pleasure in many ways and by diverse means, but the most conscious of all is through eye appeal. Man is a visually oriented animal. He establishes standards of visual attractiveness of an inflexible nature. If the standards he has set forth for beauty are modified by fashion or social change, he will never be quite as happy as before the change took place. As he grows older and styles change more, he will cling to the substance of his joy by retreating into social circles where he might reminisce of what once made him happy. In this way he maintains his vitality, albeit vicariously. With his cronies he will talk of the, quote, good old days, days replete with the sights so dear to him, now so sadly changed. His pals and the elderly girls who abound in the old compound share his nostalgia, and their clothing is out of style. Out of style! How fortunate for the inmates of senior citizen centers that they can maintain at least some semblance of the good old days, if only on their backs. Little do they realize that this very outdatedness is keeping them alive. How often it is seen that when an aging person loses interest in life, when his children have grown up and his vitality decreases, he will enter a retirement community and suddenly become revitalized. Theoretically, it would be assumed that such an atmosphere would hasten the death process and to the inertia of old age. Why does the opposite invariably occur? Because the aging person is suddenly thrown into a controlled environment, one where there is more visual imagery, conducive to his excitement and enthusiasm than the outside world. Stylishly out of style, it becomes fun for the codgers to look at each other, much as it must have been fun in their younger days, the boys gazing with lust at the girls, and the girls longing for the boys. And what about the small towns, those places bypassed by the freeways where octogenarians dominate the landscape, the little jerkwater towns where nobody ever seems to die, where they all seem too crotchety over what is going on in the world, fighting over any change that will alter the visual landscape, and only accepting that which promises freedom from pain, illness, and death. From a visual point of view, these places are completely inert. Cars are 20 years old, no buildings are ever torn down. Much time is spent on porches and park benches, around pot-bellied stoves, at the bus depot, wherever there is something to be seen. And what is seen? The same things that have always been seen. The inhabitants of such a place might not live to be 100 years old, although there exist such environments in which numbers of incredibly old people abound. It appears certain, however, that in static environments there are more old people per capita than within a constantly changing scene. It will be argued that it is natural for old people to live in such places while it is stifling to young persons. This is true, but it need not be. The main reason young people leave such environments is because they can't cope with the old farts. The old folks feel equally disdainful of the progress that is manifested in youthful styles, fully as alien to their visual joy associations as their stodginess is to the young. Under such conflicting standards of visual exhilaration, no one can be nearly so happy as if a totally compatible visual atmosphere were to prevail. Let us not forget that the young of today are crystallizing their own visual standards of beauty. Soon enough they will become the old fogies. In time they will band together in retirement communities and old people's homes, reminiscing and surrounding themselves with accoutrements of their youth. Places where people live longest are space-time warps, They could live even longer if young people dressed and looked exactly like themselves. The chronological change that accompanies style change is the culprit here. With each new advance in medical science, there is a setback, another way insofar as longevity is concerned. While men of science discover cures, they also discover means of communication and travel that open wide the very isolation that harbors uniquely collective existences. Thus, Shangri-Las are turned into Manhattans, and the germ-laden, dying 90-year-olds are turned into germ-free, smog-smothered, anxiety-ridden, dying 60-year-olds. Just as fashion centers of the world promote the quick death, so unchanging environments exist as hubs of longevity. The most deadly lie is the half-truth, and the fashion industry has perpetuated one of the most eloquent of all, namely that a fresh new approach is what keeps one young. The fresh approach does keep one young if the person is fresh, young, and vital in spirit. The freshest thing that an old man can see is a pretty girl dressed in a manner that is reminiscent of his youthful erotic crystallization. Erotically stimulating, but also emotionally acceptable. Likewise, an elderly lady will zestfully witness a handsome young man, fresh young blood, attired in the manner of the suitors that she once attracted. She can and does vicariously maintain an aura of attractiveness when confronted by such a man, and it is this very aura, constantly recharged, that will sustain her very life. When the world one loves is seen to be dying, the viewer dies a little with it. A great American painter, Reginald Marsh, exemplifies this truism. Every day until his death at the age of 56, he sketched and painted the most earthly, sweaty, and lusty examples of humanity he could lay his eyes upon. His productive voyeurism led him through the entire spectrum of cheap cafes, carnivals, amusement parks, skid rows, exclusive clubs, opera openings, coming-out parties, and everything in between. His super-realistic canvases were jammed with the kind of people he loved to watch in the environments he loved to haunt. As his closing years approached, Reginald Marsh grew depressed at the changing scene. New styles were emerging, and it now became more difficult to immerse himself in the vistas from which he had so long drawn, both in his paintings and life itself. His canvases of lumpy women and pot-bellied men were too unappealing for the think thin era of the 1950s, and his floozies violated the then-current Grace Kelly/Ivory soap look. His disdain for the modern masters, quote, Matisse draws like a 3-year-old, quote, Picasso, a false front, became exemplified as he summed up modern art as high and pure and sterile. No sex, no drink, no muscles. Marsh's out-of-date feeling reached its zenith when he was asked to take part in an art symposium. The first speaker, who was the then popular New York painter, enthusiastically championed current trends. Then followed a professor who advocated new and dynamic experimentation and visual appeal. At last it was Reginald Marsh's turn to speak. He stood on the platform for a moment as if trying to collect his thoughts. A sad look of resignation appeared in his eyes as he gazed down at the audience. The talented watcher of his innermost secret lust and life-giving scintillations, he declared softly, I am not a man of this century, and sat down. He died shortly thereafter. Anyone who is satisfied with the way things are going is reluctant to change his mode of living. This includes style, fashion, and environment. Man is the only animal who has been carefully taught to be discontent. What is even worse, man is the only animal who has been educated on one hand to be discontented, while religion has programmed him to remain static, inert, and complacent. Small wonder why he is such a mass of frustrations. If he is content with the way things are going, the priests of fashion and change coerce him into unwilling and unnecessary modification. If he is a malcontent who wishes to escape from the world he feels is shortchanging him, he is told to accept things as they are. Be thankful for small favors and await his better life in a future paradise. Evocation. The average person has one major flaw that pegs him as a perennial adolescent once he leaves his childhood. And that is the inability to participate in or to experience anything resembling a personality that diverges from his immutable emotional crystallization at the time of his adolescence. This crystallization is carried with him as an unyielding, tightly strapped knapsack which contains all of the limited elements relative to his narrow field of emotional response. The more limited one's bag, the easier it is to see what's inside. The lesser man readily advertises the contents of his bag, leaving himself open to manipulation on the part of the wizard. The wizard, having ascertained the substance of his quarry's limited emotional stimuli, needs simply to drive his attack home without concern for the possibility of his quarry defending himself. The magician, on the other hand, is able to respond to diverse situations with balanced emotional involvement. If a magician is attacked through his emotional attachment to one situation, he can escape the attack by involving himself in another equally compelling situation. The lesser man never realizes this and consequently becomes befuddled when, after first doing his dance and temporarily winning the higher man over, moves in for the kill, only to find out that the higher man is no longer running with him and is nowhere to be seen. Children who have not yet packed their bag. They enjoy the delights of many settings and situations irrespective of any connection that they might have with another. A child is not bound by the bureaucracy of the mind that ensnares the lesser elder person. Each child is a minute Renaissance man. It is one thing to be narrow-minded out of choice, but quite a different thing to be narrow-minded when one has never known how to be broad-minded. If a person has been open-minded in the early stage of adulthood, there is a good chance to become selectively narrow-minded later in life. Bigotry is exhilarating if taken up with careful deliberation, and is only self-destructive when ingrained as part of a personality. It is the difference between indulgence and compulsion. Indulgence can be controlled. Compulsion controls. One of the greatest magical devices, therefore, is to become open to gratifying emotional stimuli like a child. But closed mind when the whole will must be employed. The lesser man equates everything in his life by the standards of emotion that happen to be strapped inside of his bag, his constipated realm of being. If horses are his thing, he has little use for auto races. He is moved by Bach and Baroque splendor, but cannot relate emotionally to country and Western music. The sight of a pith helmet and the words of Kipling evoke no vision or sense of a barracks near the Khyber. How many situations move you to emotional response, which borders on total identification with the given situation? Test yourself to see how totally you can become a sounding board for random situations. Be as one, so to speak, with the total emotional response from a situation which needs but a subtle cue to get into motion. This is what children and wizards find easy. Before anyone can expect to progress in magical prowess, he must expand his consciousness, but not at the expense of his emotions. Drugs expand the consciousness quickly and effortlessly, but make only one major emotional response possible, and that is for the god directly responsible for the changeover, the drug itself. There is only one fly in this great potential sea of ointment. If one does not already respond to the varying stimuli of life around him, then no amount of exercise will make it possible. Pathetic, isn't it? No magical future, no fortune, no hope. Oh, how a man will keep trying. Reading grimoires, taking metaphysical study courses, self-help programming, pills, filters, smokes, and whatever will enable him to love that which he does not already. One cannot teach receptivity to sensation, but one can create a conducive environment in which one might prepare himself for the art of evocation. The essence of any magical working is a complete evocation. It is more important to experience total emotional response to one's environment than all the occult knowledge in the world. How pitifully few are capable of a strong evocation. The most wonderful thing of all is the ability to enter another dimension, another realm of being, and feel the wholeness of that other realm to the exclusion of all other environments. Music is the most effective tool for evocation, as the entire body rhythm is helplessly taken up by the pattern of life associated with the musical selection. A meaningful idea never dies, nor does the emotional response generated by certain compositions. If enough people are inspired or moved by these compositions, the selections become sonic repository for the accumulated emotions of all those affected by them. Becoming an all-encompassing sensing element to the collective feedback of a particular composition can yield a total evocation. With certain exceptions, the best to produce such an evocation is a hard-walled, vast enclosure that will trap the music, just opposite to the way that a pentagon of mirrors will send forth imagery. A live enclosure, producing echo and reverberation, will reflect the substance of the music, forming a sound trap. A sound trap has much the same effect as a light trap. Both are devices employed for the internalization of thought matter, whereby the ecstasy evocation will ensue. All actions and feelings, situations, and environments associated with the music involved contributes to the wondrous synthesis that becomes your evocation. The acoustics of the bullring, the circus tent, the ice skating rink, the vaulted cathedral render all excellent sound traps. The sound retention of a ballroom, auditorium, theater, etc., is such that combined with the emotional stimulus present, partner dancing closely in one's arms, a tragic play, an heroic spectacle, etc., the nearest approximation to a strong evocation that most humans might approach will be achieved. Evocation through musical internalization demands concentration. The more people present, the less chance a musician has to properly experience the music, with the possible exception of the concert hall, which is built for this express purpose. The more extraneous factors, the greater the magician is distracted from his evocation. Though enjoyment might be heightened by listening to music with kindred souls, it is easier to achieve ecstasy when one is not concerned with what others might think. Profound emotional response to music does not necessarily make an evocation, but an evocation is always a profound emotional experience. An evocation is an entire state of being, triggered by a key, music in this case, which in itself is but a distillation or capsule of the total evocation subsequently attained. Music for the ritual chamber. Music that accompanies your ritual must intensify the emotions necessary for the particular working. Music is a language in itself, and, like all other languages, if used indiscriminately, becomes both insincere and meaningless. The most popular selections soon burn themselves out through overexposure, and only when they have gone unplayed for a period of time can they assume classic status. A pleasing musical selection can easily become a habit, in fact, a compulsion. Eventually, through constant play, it will lose its appeal. Any habit can be broken by overexposure. Therefore, when selecting music for the ritual chamber, you must be able to hear and react to it in a fresh and enthusiastic manner. For this reason, I recommend that any selections you find emotionally exciting enough to evoke a decided reaction must be put aside and preserved for ritualistic purposes. Without a doubt, the most effective selections are not those which foster introspection, but those which convey an image. This, essentially, is the difference between mystical and magical in music. Mystical music is retentive in nature and does not impinge itself upon your consciousness. Magical music attacks your senses and impels a decided emotional response. Any music which can be listened to without your being consciously aware of its presence can be considered mystical in nature, even though its tempo may be fast and its volume loud. Music commonly heard piped into public areas is generally programmed so as to exert an influence on the hearer, even though he is maintaining productive flow, inducing eating and drinking, stimulating shoppers to buy, etc. The music's provider employs it toward magical ends. Those who hear it are controlled by it, rather than using it to control. If you are unmoved by music, it is not always due to a lack of emotion. Perhaps you cannot separate and isolate varying frequencies of sound. In short, you may be tone deaf. An emotional response to various musical tones occurs when a unique combination of space, time, and sound converges into a single unit. Each living creature with properly functioning sound receptors, including animals, birds, fish, and even plants, has within its being a tuned set of strings. Just how each is tuned depends on many contributing factors, both hereditary and environmental. Let us say, in order to simplify matters, that there is a separate chord tuned for each emotional response. In lower animals and plants, there is less of a diversity of chords, only pleasure and pain. Pleasure makes a cat purr, and pain makes it fight. Humans have added certain chords to their internal lyre, such as sentiment, which sometimes appears as nostalgia, a combination of pleasure and pain. Humans' internal chording is more complex because humans experience a wider range of stimuli than do other animals, though, alas, the reverse is often true. Certain intervals of sound are almost universal in their emotional effect, and they can be formulated. Hence, there are compositions which are relatively made to order for ceremonial use. Though there is some divergence of response between Eastern and Western ears, certain combinations of sound engenders atavistic responses analogous to all human beings. Which musical selections would I choose for ceremonial purposes? First of all, I would combine passages from several compositions, even though I may involve editing. I often solve this time-consuming problem by accompanying the rite on the organ. I have recorded myself playing in order that I may experience the additional satisfaction of partially creating the music which is required. The organ is put on automatic pilot, and pre-recorded music issues forth or an assistant takes over. For a gothic mood, which will enhance an archetypal satanic mass, the organ works of Bach, Couperin, Vidor, frank, and palestrina are perfect. Faure's Requiem and Pavane likewise. For a less traditional yet strong element of solemnity, try the second movement from Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, the second movement from Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, or Berlioz's Funeral and Triumphal Symphony. If you wish to invoke feelings of power, nothing can beat the following, with the opening measures of Gomez's Overture to Il Guarani, the crashing climax to the first act of Puccini's Turandot, Wagner's Overture to Tannhauer, and his Magic Fire Music and Ride of the Valkyries from Die Walkür, the finale of Lalo's Le Roi Dix, the Napoleon Bivanulasa from Kodali's Hari Janos, the Great Gate at Kiev from Muzakorsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, and also Sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss. A transition between power, compassion, and sacred love can be effected by compositions like Handel's Largo from Xerxes, the trio and apotheosis from Gounod's Faust, Va Pensiero from Verdi's Nabucco, the overture to von Flotov's Marth, Sibelius's Finlandia, the Dracula theme from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, the same composer's overture to Romeo and Juliet, Wagner's Liebestod from Tristan and Isolde, and the Granadinas from Caleo Barrera's Immigrantes. For purely sensual purposes, the unholy musical trinity surely must be Ravel's Bolero, Orff's Carmina Burana, and the Bacchanali from Saint-Saëns, Samson and Delilah. These are but a few of the seeming endless list of suitable musical selections, chosen at random and based upon productive past use. I have excluded evocative music of a more popular nature because, like everyone else, I have my personal favorites, which are readily identifiable with meaningful situations. Perhaps one day I shall share them with you, and it will be seen that many Satanists, like other emotional responsive individuals, favor the same tunes. Evangelist versus the New God. It comes as no surprise that the televangelists are being cashiered on all fronts, either through scandal or absurdity. People are wising up about the Swaggerts and the Roberts and the Backers only because it is time for them to be allowed to wise up. Why? Because the Christ sellers were beginning to compete with the very God that they were employing, TV. In previous centuries, the church was the great controller, dictating morality, stifling free expression, imposing as conservator of all great music and art. Today we have television dictating fashions, thoughts, attitudes, objectives, as once did the church, using many of the same techniques but doing it so palatably that no one notices. Instead of sins to keep people in line, we have fear of being judged unacceptable by our peers, by not wearing the right running shoes, not drinking the right kind of beer, or wearing the wrong kind of deodorant. and fear of imposed insecurity concerning our own identities. Borrowing the Christian soul salvation concept, television tells people that only through exposure to TV can the sins of alienation and ostracism be absolved. We don't have to go out early Sunday mornings to get religion. That was too much work. Now all we have to do is click the remote control, and the church comes to us. We're intimate with television's comforting presence from the moment we pop out of our mother's womb. Indeed, TV is omnipresent, shadowing us more than the obsolete God shadowed Joan of Arc. There are television sets in every home, every restaurant, every hotel room, every shopping mall. Now they're even small enough to carry in your pocket like electronic rosaries. It is an unquestioned part of everyday life. Kneeling before the cathode ray God, with our TV guide concordance in hand, we maintain the illusion of choice by flipping channels. It doesn't matter what is flashing on the screen. All that's important is that the TV stays on. When the Church based its mandate on the Holy Bible as the Word of God Almighty, it brought out the doubters because their claim betrayed a glaring lack of logic. The Holy Fathers devised the necessity for faith in hopes of covering up the inherent problems. But when TV masquerades as entertainment, there's no room for doubt. No absurd premises are being advanced, so no one has any cause to resist. No matter how much a free thinker you believe you are, there is still the influence of television on your life. To deny TV now would be as atheistic as Ingersoll denying the existence of God. Naturally, the televangelists had to be cut off. They were alienating the sheep from the shepherd. The ends are the same as they've always been. Sheep must be kept in line and encouraged to deposit money in the right places. But the televangelists became too greedy in their invoking of God, siphoning off too big a chunk of money for themselves. That's why the present religious war isn't between any forces of good and evil. It is being waged between the media versus churches, who are tying up millions of dollars in valuable property and assets. As Satanists, we have the advantage of realizing this early in the game. It has never been enough for us to be atheistic. We have learned how to smash religious ignorance by beating them at their own game, using the Christians' own manufactured fears to destroy them. We can use TV as a potent propaganda machine. The stage is set for the infusion of true satanic philosophy and potent, emotionally inspiring music to accompany the inverted crosses and pentagrams. Instead of holding our rituals in chambers designed for a few dozen people, we are moving into auditoriums crowded with ecstatic Satanists, thrusting their fists forward in the sign of the horns. As much bad press as the Church of Satan has received from the media over the past few years, satanic child abuse, sacrifices, etc., mention of the Satanic Bible only points people in our direction. Perhaps that's the plan, after all. The key is to use television as not be used by it. Munitions makers don't try the new stuff out on themselves. If it takes turning your television to the wall or throwing it out the window, do it. We are adversaries to be reckoned with, and must not be taken in by our own infernal devices. We must allow stratification to develop, so that a world for the vital and living can be established and maintained. Some evidence of a new satanic age. Part 2. In the Satanic Bible, I provided some example of how modern Christianity was modifying itself to keep in step with diabolical advances. Now it's time to recognize yet another manifestation. Many of you have already read my writings identifying TV as the new god. There is a little thing I neglected to mention up until now. Television is the major mainstream infiltration of the new satanic religion. The birth of the TV was a magical event foreshadowing its satanic significance. The first radio commercial broadcast was aired on Walpurgisnacht, April 30th, 1939, at the New York World's Fair. Since then, TV's infiltration has been so gradual, so complete, that no one even noticed. People don't need to go to church anymore. They get their morality plays on television. What began modestly as rabbit ears on top of a family TV set are now satellite dishes and antennas, pridefully dominating the skyline, replacing crosses on top of churches. The TV set, or satanic family altar, has grown more elaborate since the early 50s, from the tiny fuzzy screen to huge entertainment centers covering entire walls with several TV monitors. What started as an innocent respite from everyday life has become in itself a replacement for real life for millions, a major religion for the masses. The consumer society in which we now live is an extension of the society once governed by religion for many centuries. Instead of obeying the Holy Bible, right or wrong, TV advertising now instructs us what to buy and what not to buy. Atheism wasn't tolerated when scriptural dictates were in fashion and accepted as the word. Now, thanks to satanic infiltration, it's safe to say, I don't believe in God. But modern heresy, not conforming to a television lifestyle, not accepting the television truths, is liable to be punished with as much righteous enthusiasm as ever. The clergy of the TV religion are those entertainers, newscasters in particular, who nightly spread the word from their cathode ray pulpit. The network newscasters are the high priests and high priestesses of Satanism, bending the minds of the viewers to the requirements of consumer marketing. The local newscasters are the parish priests, yawking, ribbing, and emoting over the latest local tragedies. Celebrities, whether local or national, are all part of the hierarchy of the church, men of the cloth. There should be no complaint regarding network priests arriving to report on scenes of devastation in white stretch limos. After all, they are royalty within the church and should be accorded the same privileges as a visiting pope, cardinal, or archbishop. There is no way a person can escape religion as long as he is living in a religious environment. Situation comedies, dramatic series, and soap operas are broadcast day and night 7 days a week to activate and sustain the lifestyles of the parishioners, where before only fanatics practiced daily devotions. The masses committed only one day, Sunday, to the Christian God. As I've said before, the TV guide is the new concordance. Tabloids and news magazines supply the instructions for pious living. TV devotion has become so pervasive that even motion pictures are presented today in the same fast-cut, limited information style. As the satanic stratification increases, aided by the diabolical machine, one of our tasks is to develop a graduated system to type people according to their TV lifestyle. Various levels, from spectators to stimulators, can be identified by the level of TV saturation and influence. At the bottom is the complete entertainer, the ultimate provider of stimulation. Contrary to prevailing Christian values, a person who does something to hone and perfect a skill should be regarded as the most highly evolved. Someone that spends his free time doing things should receive respect and support in proportion to how productive his activity is, how solitary it is, how benign as opposed to how disruptive it is. The TV junkie lives his life for television. Like a religious nut, he follows everything that is going on in the media and doesn't find it necessary to know anything else. Many TV junkies are not satisfied with keeping their knowledge to themselves and force their slaves' acumen on others. They are comparable to the zealots who carry the good book around with them, preaching the word of the Lord to each and every person they encounter. The well-known couch potato inhabits the next level. He's an inveterate TV watcher, one who has the TV going all the time, like talking wallpaper. Perhaps he has TV screens within screens, or 2 or 3 sets blasting at once. He is equivalent to the Bible reader, who has the good book present at all times, in every room. Ornate family Bibles in the living room, one on his nightstand, one handy in the kitchen, another reachable by the toilet. Though not quite as evangelical as the TV junkie, the couch potato rarely strays out of TV range. Next on the list is the casual Christian who watches on a fairly regular basis. Although Christian, he is nevertheless influenced by television and cannot or will not entertain anything outside the parameters of media input. The small-time parishes inhabited by local newspapers are the true believers. Finally, we get the professionals who sit atop this spectrum of religiosity, and because of the nature of their jobs, realize what must be done to maintain their professional or occupational status. Like highly placed Vatican leaders, they never really believe what they're saying. Once it's been resolved in a Satanist mind that TV is a very workable proponent of Satanism in its most practical form, then he may want to remove himself from the firing line, much like the Jesuit priest or rabbi or minister who doesn't, in his secret life, go along with every rule that he admonishes to his parishioners to adhere to. The lower clergy can deny the truth about the devilish plot behind the television, but identification has been made. It will be impossible to dispel the equivalence that I've pointed out. They'll have a hitch in their brain every time they report more satanic hysteria, knowing we consider them priests of Satanism. It cannot help but influence their attitude, actions, and behavior toward us in the future. Sweet slavery, sainthood, martyrdom. What a waste of precious masochism that could instead be directed toward the most profane infatuation. Love cannot exist without a master-slave relationship. But who, having known each role, would not find slavery the more desirable? Nay, the only role which can be felt. In love, even the master is constantly monitored by the contrivances necessary to sustain slavish adoration. Far better to experience total anguish. It requires no effort, demands no criteria, imposes no limits. To be loved, feelings must be rationed. To love, the doors of hysteria, fantasy, madness may be flung open. Pick an idol, grovel well, and suffer in ecstasy. Then you, in turn, will be idolized fourfold by others. Just make sure your love object is not too rationally chosen, for compulsion and rationality seldom coexist. It is easier to love a tyrant, nitwit, an anomaly, than perfection. For the masochism of love demands debasement unobtainable through sterling sources. The pure are admired, but never desired for anything other than as soap for the soul. It is the imperfect that compels and makes a fool of one, and in foolishness is returned to childhood. A little adolescence is worth a ton of hoary profundity. That is why young love, being the most irrational, is the most consuming. As one grows older, one does not love stronger, only more collectively. In essence, it is no longer, recognize me, my love, but remember me, my loves. Vision turned to reverie unfortunately suffers in the translation. There may be no fool like an old fool, but being a young fool is more fun, for the foolishness is fresh and invigorating, no matter how fraught with desperation. Confessions of a Closet Misogynist. I have long held W. Somerset Maugham in high esteem. He was certainly a first-rate Satanist, and whatever his own sexual preoccupations may have been, he really knew women. Because of, rather than in spite of, his casting of weak, wanton, yielding, and fallen women in his stories, those very females became stronger than his male characters. Like Milton's heroic Satan stealing the show from the heavenly host in Paradise Lost, Maughams debauched floozies emerged with stronger personas than his conscience-stricken, meaning-of-life-seeking heroes. Somehow, in reducing women to weak and vulnerable creatures, humiliated as only a confirmed misogynist could portray them, Maugham evoked an essential as well as eternal female. It is that very essentialness that makes a well-adjusted heterosexual misogynist a bulwark against the most devastating form of defeminization. A misogynist requires an imperfect and flawed yet feminine form of woman in order to properly exercise his disdain. His disdain is, of course, based on jealousy. An overtly mannish or dominant woman creates no dualistic yearnings and is simply contemptible as a useless critter too proud for burden, not attractive enough for exploitation. In other words, it's far better to be used than useless. I have, since pubescent excesses and youthful errors, been a womanizer. I was never the type that girls felt secure bringing home to meet their folks. I always met my dates at prearranged and clandestine places. The fact that I appeared as a heavy undoubtedly elicited a certain appeal to sweet Gwendolyn types. It was therefore understandable that aggressively passive women, yes, there is such a creature, gravitated to me. Eventually I realized that I was, because of my enthusiasm and naivety, becoming a slave to my demandingly masochistic women. If that sounds like a contradiction in terms, it is. It is also a very real phenomenon, which can be depleting if unrecognized and unchanged. There is a great deal of misunderstanding about misogyny, similar to that of the stock misunderstanding of sadism, as related in the Satanic Bible. An Epicurean sadist does not go about insulting people, pulling wings off butterflies, or tossing banana peels in front of senior citizens. An obnoxious person is invariably a latent masochist with little self-awareness that his baiting demeanor is simply a punch-in-the-nose insurance. Similarly, an apparent superstud insulter of women who sprinkles his vocabulary with offensive terms for female genitalia is usually a forlorn, aggravated by them because they are in competition for his strongest cravings, other men. He may not even admit these yearnings to himself, so he gravitates to correspondingly man-hating women, usually latent lesbians, and they clinically swing together amidst groups of other liberated souls. A true misogynist is a straight man who, because he is a potential pushover for women and realizes it, resents the power a truly feminine woman wields, secretly admires this power, and seeks to capture it before it captures him. By reducing a woman to a role of servitude, he finds himself in the role of a tyrant. He wants to be a benign and considerate tyrant, but all too often a little consideration goes a short way. He really loves women, but the poor things won't let him affect an expansive and pleasing sexual delineation essential to his masculinity. He consequently hates them for it. By not displaying archetypal signals of femininity, they rob him of the ultimate expression of his masculinity. It will be argued that the foregoing only indicates insecurity of one's masculine prowess or self-doubt. This is not the case, for prowess as a man is not at stake, but rather identity and counter-identity of a harmonious nature are threatened. The desired merger is one of a yin-yang correspondence. It might be fair to state that a misogynist is often really punishing the pure female for the sins of the impure pretender, for whom he would either fell patronizing ridicule or else inflexible anger. Speaking for myself, I idealize Moham's type of women, just as the types depicted by Rubens, Renoir, and Reginald Marsh. They are considered common types, but are actually quite uncommon. A soft, yielding, voluptuous woman with a personality to match is a rarity nowadays. With an overabundance of the opposite kind, Pan would be hard-pressed for nymphs, and could be not blamed if his syrinx went flat. Pentagonal Revisionism, a 5-point program. In recent years, we've wasted far too much time explaining that Satanism has nothing to do with kidnapping, drug abuse, child molestation, animal or child sacrifice, or any number of other acts that idiots, hysterics, or opportunists would like to credit us with. Satanism is a life-loving, rational philosophy that millions of people adhere to. Now we're ready for something that goes quite a few steps beyond just explaining our principles. Every revisionist movement needs a set of goals, guidelines that are clear, concrete, and that will affect significant changes. The following 5-point program reflects attitudes which allow others to decide whether they wish to align themselves with Satanism or not. Each is necessary for satanic change to take place. When asked what we're doing, here's the answer. 1. Stratification, the point on which all the others ultimately rest. There can be no more myth of equality for all. It only translates to mediocrity and supports the weak at the expense of the strong. Water must be allowed to seek its own level without interference from apologists for incompetence. No one should be protected from the effects of his own stupidity. 2. Strict taxation of all churches. If churches were taxed for their income and property, they'd crumble overnight of their own obsolescence, and the national debt would be wiped out as quickly. The productive, the creative, the resourceful should be subsidized. So long as the useless and incompetent are getting paid, they should be heavily taxed. 3. No tolerance for religious beliefs secularized and incorporated into law and order issues. To reestablish lex talionis would require a complete overturning of the present injustice system based on Judeo-Christian ideals, where the victim/defender has been made the criminal. Amnesty should be considered for anyone in prison because of his alleged influence upon the actual perpetrator of the crime. Everyone is influenced in what he or she does. Scapegoating has become a way of life, a means of survival for the unfit. As an extension of the Judeo-Christian cop-out of blaming the devil for everything, criminals can gain leniency, even praise, by placing the blame on the convenient villain. Following the satanic creed of responsibility to the responsible, in a satanic society, everyone must experience the consequences of his own actions, for good or ill. 4. development and production of artificial human companions, the forbidden industry, an economic godsend which allows everyone power over someone else, polite, sophisticated, technologically feasible slavery, and the most profitable industry since TV and the computer. 5. The opportunity for anyone to live within a total environment of his or her choice, with mandatory adherence to the aesthetic and behavioral standards of the same. Privately owned, operated, and controlled environments as an alternative to homogenized and polyglot ones. The freedom to insularize oneself within a social milieu of personal well-being. An opportunity to feel, see, hear that which is most aesthetically pleasing, without interference from those who would pollute or detract from that option. This is the encapsulated version of the current thrust of satanic advocacy. So when someone asks you, well, what do Satanists do? You will be qualified to tell him. To further explore some of these points, read the following. This must never happen again. When a point of critical mass is reached, the point of no return, the package it came in will never sell anymore. There will always be the cliched, this must never happen again. But it takes painful memories and evolutionary strangulation to force them into an effective warning. The American Civil War. The destruction of Atlanta, brother against brother, son against father, wreaking carnage on common ground. This must never happen again. The First World War. Mechanized warfare, hometown boys crushed on foreign soil by metal monsters. This must never happen again. The Second World War. Holocaust and nuclear leavings. This must never happen again. The current Third World War. Human locusts overrunning the world, necessitating the thinning out of populations because the rule of the fool has, for the first time in history, threatened to destroy civilization and evolution. This must never happen again. Until space colonies accommodate the teeming, huddled masses, how will this war be resolved? Technology has left human self-awareness in the dust. Surely it would be simpler and more economically practical to continue the propagation of consumers at the cost of human evolution. But the Earth could not survive. How to isolate and evolve genetically superior humans is the great task of stratification. Space ghettos. It has been said, we all must become productive members of society. What society? A universal society? A stratified society? A personally chosen society? No, comes the reply from the dictators of acceptability. The society you live within, when in Rome. But suppose there's no more Rome, in which to do as the Romans. Suppose Rome is no different in most ways that really count, than Hong Kong, Mexico City, or Los Angeles. If stratification means ghettoization, let it be. Call it insularism, whatever you wish. But let's have different rules for different people, providing there are different environments. Regulations imposed upon the dwellers who thrive in a cesspool should not be imposed upon those who have chosen to lead a monastic life. Nor should the restrictions of a monk be imposed on those who prefer to spend their time in the drawing room. Let's face it, most people are locusts, part of a herd. Herd behavior suits them. They thrive on it. Through chromosomal and conditional cloning, they cannot be otherwise. The solution is a new kind of ghetto, with its regulations, restrictions, status symbols, incentives, and benefits tailored to its inhabitants' needs. Above all, however, it must not be called a ghetto, even though it occupies most of the land. Mongrelization has produced a very large ghetto, but ghetto it is. Space limitations withstanding, new ghettos will be space ghettos. The desirability of outer space migration has made it easy. The herd has been softened up by the media since the days of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. But please don't dampen the enthusiasm of these pioneers by the term space ghetto. Better to refer to it as new frontiers. When ghettos become the mainstream of society, islands of individuality cannot help but harbor an elite. And that earthly elite must be sanctioned at any cost. Destructive organisms. Vandals, those who destroy and deface objects and property other than their own, should, when apprehended, be destroyed, or at least punished in a fitting manner. If a painting hanging in a museum is slashed, the perpetrator of that act should be eviscerated. If paint is used to deface, the defacer's countenance should be permanently dyed in an irregular and repellent manner. If a carefully tended shrub or plant is wantonly ripped up by the roots, the culprit's arm should be ripped out of its socket. No one has the right to harm or destroy another's belongings. Vandalism is seldom motivated by profit or revenge, but simply an urge to destroy. Those who indulge in gratuitous destruction show the same degree of respect for inanimate things as they do themselves. They cry out by their acts to be destroyed. Vandalism has been, for too long, paid scant attention, simply because, after all, it's only a tree or statue, windshield, schoolroom, or theater seat. It's assumed these things can be repaired or replaced, unlike crimes involving bodily harm. But the value of a painting which has been slashed should be recognized for more than its monetary worth. Inanimate though it is, the painting contributes far more to others' pleasure and life itself than does the living creature who defaces it. Immunity from punishment goads the vandal to pursue his destructive lifestyle. He is only slightly removed, and often identical in temperament, to the thrill killer of animals, who knows that even if he should be apprehended, he'll not draw much of a sentence. Blatant killers take out their self-hatred on animals or inanimate objects because, quite simply, they can get away with it. If these destroyers hate themselves so much, proclaiming their uselessness by wanton acts of cruelty to organic or inorganic things, then they make ideal game for which there should be perennial open season. Clothes make the slave. The consciousness of being perfectly well dressed may bestow a peace such as religion cannot give. How often has been heard the expression, a slave to fashion? What once described a fop or clothes horse now applies to practically everyone. Fashion in clothing has become a tool with which to create a type of police state dreaded by most as an impending threat to individuality. Ironically, those who fear the worst, the self-professed nonconformist, is unwittingly playing right into the hands of the puppet master. He mistakes the mediocrity for individuality, and all the while he laughs at the past. He becomes an unwitting embodiment of the worst kind of contemporary kitsch. Just as one will pay plenty for a new economy car, quote, Americans love economy and will pay anything to get it, so will most conform to whatever clothing standards are foisted upon them, so long as it is accompanied by a convenient rationale. Consider the development of trousers for women. It came with emancipation. Even though sexual mores were becoming looser, women started wearing trousers for their freedom of movement. Through the 1940s to the present time, women have worn slacks, capris, pedal pushers, and whatever else was in style, so long as they could spread their limbs in comfort. In so doing, they have established a standard of prudery that would make Victoria look bawdy by comparison. Amidst carefully programmed porn, slick and abundant, exists today a primness unrivaled in Western culture. In their freedom, people have become accustomed to depictions once only accessible to gynecologists and proctologists. One can purchase all manner of material depicting human genitalia in its most aseptic glory. Yet try to catch a glimpse of bare leg on a woman walking down the street. Turn-of-the-century petticoats couldn't do a better job of concealing a nasty ankle or calf so much as a shapeless pair of pre-washed denim. Photo essays abound portraying the labia of emancipated women. But where in public dares a lady display an inch of bare thigh when not swimming, playing tennis, or sunbathing? Saint Pantyhose doth protect her upper limbs from the gaze of the heathen. Lust comes packaged in an instruction book, a sensitivity class, an automated grope session, a chess-like game played by robot-like participants. Homosexuals are the referees. The referees have their own games, but they're less often played by robots. For their own rules are the most conducive to unaffected behavior. Sounds contradictory? Not really. Amidst all the plumage, leather, S&M, posturing, and drag is an aura of gut reaction sex. Homosexuals have not been duped by the prudes, and are the beneficiaries of heterosexual stupidity and pliability. Homosexuals are the only people who have approached sexual freedom. The rest are more hung up than ever before, and the sad thing is they don't know it and would resent any attempt to change their situation. The growing acceptance of homosexuality, which was needed to decrease the birth rate, manifested its influence on standards of dress and physical desirability. Soon men appeared more feminine and women more masculine, and a monster called sex differentiation began to creep forth. By the 60s, classic archetypes of comeliness were reversed. Most likely, the man would make a better woman, feature for feature, and the woman could easily pass for a man if she added a little fake stubble or beard. The true act of blasphemy is achieved more by violating certain standards of dress than by political dissent, as Herbert Spencer proclaimed. You may think you are protesting social inequity or sexism by wearing poverty chic or gas station elegance. Patched, faded, ragged, stained, wrinkled, or drab. If you can't exercise a keen sense of innovation or recreation, it may have dawned on you to wear a uniform. Perhaps a frayed and patched mechanic's jumpsuit or other frayed uniform of the dehumanized. Who says 1984 hasn't come home to roost? Babbitt's Last Stand. Everybody loves a winner. Everybody loves a loser as well. The in-betweens, the neglected nonentity, known as the middle class, are those who receive no gratuities. A guy with little money must work like hell to get more. Nobody gives him anything for nothing. If one is cursed by a mediocre lifestyle, he can progress only by appearing either more downtrodden than he is or more affluent than he is. One constantly hears that the middle class pays the bills for society, which is, of course, accurate. The rich get richer and the poor get richer. The struggler gets nowhere. Religious orders have thrived on contrived poverty by posing as beggars in dire need. Welfare recipients never worry about where next month's rent will come from. They have cars, but eschew driver's insurance, medical care, color TVs, grass, booze, contraceptives, legal aid, food stamps, and more. Furthermore, a destitute appearance frees one from the rigors of good grooming. One can wear rags, go unwashed, sit or lie on the floor, ground, or rooftop. No creases need to be kept in trousers. Grease and dust may decorate clothing. Tears and rips may go unmended. Food may be spilled over garments, upholstery, and rugs with impunity. Nothing can be stolen that cannot easily be replaced, often by the same method. The slightest talent will soon be recognized amidst austerity and poverty, for there is little glamour to obscure it. The humility implied by this lifestyle attracts aid, sponsorship, and support from those in more affluent circumstances, whose self-esteem is boosted by acts of charity. The lowest have nothing to lose and everything to gain. When one sleeps on the floor, one not fear falling out of bed. A pipsqueak can feel like a big shot when he is around those who have less than himself. Then he will react to his feelings or grandeur by patronizing the nonentity, not realizing that his inferior probably has greater security and comfort than himself. The lowest pay no taxes, are dismissed from jury duty and other public servitude, yet are provided with police and fire protection. No tithings can be extracted from them by religions, yet they are the benefactors of religious charities. If they form the most ad hoc religious body, however, their presumed poverty ensures them cooperation from tax boards, enabling them to extract tax-free plunder from others. They are truly a privileged class. Because a loser is no threat to anyone, he is an ideal candidate for love and kindness, bestowed in even greater abundance by those who consider weakness a virtue. At the other end of the spectrum, a winner is respected and somewhat feared, and because he is at the top, will find ready supplicants who will do much to curry his favor. To know him, however slightly, lends identification. A popular hero need but hint that he desires something, and it will be provided by one who wishes recognition. Those who understand the poser's need to impress will take full advantage by raising the price. That is why a fool and his money are soon popular but later broke. Whoever can effect a convincing impression of wealth, culture, and influence, however, will find many favors bestowed upon him. Others of lesser bearing will not see him coming and raise the price, but instead will unconsciously buy an ego-gratifying affinity by charging less than normal. Persons in high circles live by a tactic understanding that money is something to be discussed and displayed to the lower classes, but of little necessity to their own sovereignty. A famous personage will patronize a certain restaurant where an arrangement has been made permitting the celebrity and his entourage free meals in exchange for the use of the celebrity's name in column items, which seldom neglect to mention that he is a big tipper, encouraging social climbers to do likewise. Most importantly, a celebrity's presence adds prestige to any establishment. There are strong similarities between the bestowal of benefits to the lowest class and the highest. The public figure gets it free, or rather trades his stature for gifts which are provided by those who require his presence or sanction, that they might collect from the strugglers. The strugglers pay the rich man's bills, as well as the poor's. It may take money to make money, but when money becomes less valuable, other forms of wampum will sustain the adage. It takes creature comforts to accrue additional comforts. Power begets power. Influence provides greater influence. These things may be obtained with money, but money is not mandatory for their attainment. To obtain and acquire, one must at least present an image of either poverty or affluence. I foresee a time when the upper class will flourish by a sophisticated form of barter, while the lower class will be provided for by the state, each according to his ability and needs. There will be no middle class. If one of the lower class displays upward motivation with ability, he will discard his dependence upon the state and move to the higher class. Conversely, if a member of the higher class finds discomfort in the impositions made upon him by his peers and surroundings, he will welcome the ordered, independent life provided by the lower class. In such a society, a certain degree of strife must exist. Where the family unit cannot provide it, controlled outside turmoil must be made available. Lest this read like a utopian fantasy, it should be realized that strife and anguish are essential to a utopia, since a touch of masochism prevails in the most habitual sadist. A utopia without problems would not be a true utopia, for it would lack the dilemmas and scandals that fill the void of intellectual lethargy and ineptitude. Gifted sensitives. Most occult types who call themselves sensitives are about as sensitive as a toilet seat. One who is truly sensitive has increased susceptibility to external stimuli. A sensitive person is self-conscious and often introverted. He or she would lack the colossal gall and assertiveness that characterize those who freely proclaim themselves sensitive. A few seers through the ages have realized this, and wisely engaged another person as their front man. John Dee had Edward Kelly and Jeanne Dixon and Ruth Montgomery. One of the pair can then stick to being sensitive, while the other takes care of public exposure. I have found the most highly touted sensitive to be the thickest-skinned, densest, most parsimonious, callous, and insensitive specimens of humanity one could encounter, and they are usually stupid as well. In certain circles it used to be said that if you couldn't get a legitimate job, you could either become a crook or a preacher. Nowadays, if a person isn't good for anything else, he can become a pusher or a gifted psychic. Let me entertain you. There are many fine techniques for maintaining your identity as a Satanist without placing yourself in the role of entertainer. The best method consists of shattering another's cherished preconceptions by a series of disappointments. The result is an uncertainty that is unnerving and definitely not entertaining, for your victim, that is. The key is boredom. Most people welcome a challenge. Some will even thrive on insults. There are those who find it stimulating, simply soaking up another's presence without a word being spoken. But no one likes boredom. There is not a single person who is not bored by something. Discover what bores another, and you needn't worry that he will vampirize you. Since most people's entire lives are occupied by attempts to relieve boredom, you as a Satanist constitute a tremendous attraction. Whether or not you welcome that attraction is another thing. As you have probably discovered, it has its advantages and disadvantages. How many times have you been trapped into talking Satanism to someone totally uninteresting to you, while the same gathering boasts someone not only receptive but stimulating? Clearly, it is you who is bored, and your irresponsible listener who is entertained. Discourage the pest by boring him more than he bores you. Answer his questions with long, rambling narratives that veer completely away from the topic that seems to interest him so greatly. Don't let him interrupt, but insist on finishing your story with apparent enthusiasm, with the attitude that he must hear your every word. If he tries to cut in, tell him you'll get to him as soon as you finish your train of thought. There is nothing like an excruciatingly dull and jargon-loaded digression to turn off the most persistent social parasite. If you are a natural bore, but have chosen to become a Satanist in order to compensate for your lusterless personality, read no further. If you don't want to spend valuable time boring a parasite, employ the element of escape. The sudden phone call, the forgetting to have put money in the parking meter, are the more obvious escape mechanisms. A difficult contingency encountered while attempting escape is just one more question. It's like the caller who won't let you get off the phone even if you tell him the building is on fire. The solution for the problem is found in the satanic statement, responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. A pest shows little responsibility where you are concerned, yet expects it in return. Cut him off with, "I must attend to something, I'll be right back." Leave him and don't return. In other words, lie. Your conscience shouldn't bother you a bit. With few exceptions, self-help books teach us how to be interesting, attractive, stimulating, acceptable, and entertaining. Emily Post and Dale Carnegie are simple variants of 199 Ways to Pick Up Girls. Most people need instructions on how to secure invitations to parties, let alone be the life of the party. As a known Satanist, you may not be the life of the party, but rest assured, you will arouse no small amount of curiosity and speculation. Don't entertain Jesus freaks by debating with them. Logic will get you nowhere, nor will quoting scripture. You present a challenge to those convinced of your malevolence. They secretly nourish the hope that you will submit to a long-winded exchange on theology, followed by a harrowing display of diabolical blasphemy. Give them nothing. If there are no witnesses, maybe you might want to give them more than they bargained for. But that's another story altogether. An effective way to deal with entertain me types is the put-on. I'm sure many of you have practiced it in varying degrees, describing orgies, human sacrifices, cattle mutilations, etc., to wide-eyed listeners. The problem with the put-ons is that the need to believe is so strong, entertainment/fear will linger long after your departure. You will have neither disappointed, bored, nor disappeared from them. You will still, albeit in a drastic manner, send them away with their cherished fears intact. But if you employ the put-on method, your quarry will be left feeling foolish, which is almost as unsettling as being bored. After assuring themselves that you will make an entertaining or amusing pastime, they must be left with a feeling that it is they who have provided you with amusement. The formula can be distilled to: act deadly serious but appear silly. Remember, in our visually oriented world, looks mean everything. The convincer or gimmick to guarantee a feeling of foolishness is what I call satanic kitsch. Decorate a room with the most hokey Halloween bric-a-brac you can find. Make sure the room is red and black. If you can find a day-glow red, so much the better. Fill the chamber with as many obviously plastic artifacts as you can find. Halloween is the perfect time to stock up on rubber bats, plastic pitchforks, and the like. Don't forget jack-o'-lantern and black cat cutouts. Remember, if you're a Satanist, it's supposed to be Halloween every night. Above all, while entertaining, keep a straight face. Evidence absolutely no true sense of humor, other than monster movie host puns on a 9-year-old level, just to show you really do have a sense of humor. As media folks and civilians usually point to others with a sigh of relief. To start, serve your guest a Bloody Mary with Lugosi aplomb. Furnishings should be in awful condition. Try to seat your victim in a lumpy armchair with a strategically sprung spring poking his ass. Your position while talking should naturally be upon a seedy throne chair. To construct such a throne, attach doodads like bats and devil heads and skulls to the top and arms of a regular armchair. A dais can be made from a packing crate painted silver and sprinkled with glitter. Attire should be incongruous. Wear the most conservative, well-tailored suit you can afford, or, if a woman, a tasteful ensemble of good fit and fabric. Your shoes should be classic and neat as possible. Over the tasteful garments, wear a cape. Not a well-made cape of rich fabric and quality workmanship, but a thin and skimpy model showing creases and wrinkles, crooked seams, and at least one loose thread pleading to be pulled. Wear it slightly askew, just enough to be unnerving. If you can keep a straight face, stick some plastic suction cup horns on your forehead while your victim isn't looking. For background music, try Disney's Sounds of the Haunted Mansion album, or if you can find it, the Portsmouth Symphonia's version of Grieg's Hall of the Mountain King. Don't use the CD or a taped version, as it's more effective to frequently leave your throne to flip the record. Assistants can be employed to advantage, providing that they too can keep a straight face. Your assistants should wear ill-fitting robes, too short or long and droopy, of similar quality and workmanship as your cape. They should stand about, looking as sober as is humanly possible, while you entertain your victim with sincere comments and answers. Now is the time when you yank the carpet out from under. When your victim has departed, but is still within earshot, bellow forth the loudest and most delighted laughter you and whomever may be on hand can produce. Continue your whooping until you are certain your victim has vacated the immediate neighborhood. I'm aware of the objections to the preceding technique. It might be argued that instead of making your victim feel foolish, he will go away convinced that Satanists are no better than raucous lodge brothers at a fraternal convention, that you don't take your beliefs seriously, and therefore aren't worth taking seriously either. You may feel that antics like the aforementioned are a mockery of Satanism and can only undermine the kind of dignity towards which we strive. If improperly performed, a put-on can do more harm than good. That is why it is essential to select a victim who is conspicuously patronizing or condescending, smug despite his profound, quote, sincere interest. If your victim really has a sense of humor and a discriminating eye, you may be sure that his opinion of you will soar, and he'll most likely want to affiliate with you. Don't hold your breath, though. Chances are your victim is not imbued with that rare sort of perception, and you will have given him exactly what he deserves: ridicule. It is a terrifying thing when the animals laugh at the hunter. Take a tip from Harlequin and the Joker. If you imitate a fool well, you are not likely to be fooled by others. To be it bluntly, albeit originally, a fool who knows he is a fool is indeed a wise man.